Step into the 18th century, a time when symbols still shaped the world, but this time, they carried a different message. The candle flickered in a Parisian salon, casting long shadows on the walls covered with books. A young philosopher sat at his desk, dipping his quill into ink. He wasn't writing about divine will or fate, he was writing about reason, liberty, and the power of the human mind. This was the age of Enlightenment, where symbolism moved away from death and destiny and instead embraced progress, knowledge, and revolution. But what did that mean for art, literature, and architecture? Let's unravel the symbols that defined the 18th century and compare them to the darker, more dramatic symbols of the 17th century. In the 17th century, symbols were dramatic, religious, and emotional skulls, hourglasses, and intense contrasts between light and dark. But by the 18th century, a new way of thinking emerged. The Enlightenment placed reason, knowledge, and social progress above fate and divine intervention. Symbols became brighter, more intellectual, and often represented freedom, science, and human rights. One of the most powerful symbols of the era. Think of paintings where a single candle illuminates a philosopher's face as he reads. That light wasn't just light, it was the metaphor for knowledge and enlightenment. Unlike the 17th century use of candles as a reminder of fleeting time, 18th century candles symbolized wisdom pushing back the darkness of ignorance. Even in portraits, figures were often painted with books, telescopes, or maps highlighting discovery and progress. Instead of the haunting Vanitas paintings of the past, Enlightenment art celebrated rationality and human potential. Example, in Joseph Wright of Derby's painting, a philosopher giving a lecture on the orrery, light doesn't come from heaven or divine intervention, it comes from scientific knowledge itself. If you walked into a Parisian cafe in the mid-1700s, you'd hear heated debates about democracy, freedom, and human rights. The 18th century was the time of Voltaire, Rousseau, and Montesquieu, writers who used symbolism to challenge the monarchy and the church. The quill and scroll became symbols of intellectual power. A king's crown meant nothing if the words written on a page could inspire a revolution. The Declaration of Independence, written in 1776, was filled with symbolic imagery. Phrases like represented a new vision of human rights and democracy. The words themselves became symbols of change. Unlike the 17th century's fatalistic and religious texts, 18th century literature believed in progress, debate, and questioning authority. If you lived in the 1600s, you would walk into a Baroque cathedral with swirling decorations, golden ceilings, and paintings of saints looking down on you. The architecture was designed to make you feel small, to remind you of divine power. But in the 1700s, architecture took a different path. Neoclassicism was born. Buildings became simple, symmetrical, and inspired by ancient Greece and Rome. Gone were the exaggerated, emotion-filled designs of the Baroque period. Instead, governments and thinkers built structures that embodied reason and order: parliaments, universities, and museums. For example, the U.S. Capitol building and the Pantheon in Paris, both inspired by Greek and Roman temples, reflecting the Enlightenment's love for rationality and democracy. The 17th century was a world filled with mystery, religious devotion, and the ever-present reminder of mortality. Symbols were dramatic, and their meanings were clear. Skulls, hourglasses, and candles all served as warnings that life was fleeting, and death was inevitable. Paintings depicted darkness and light clashing, representing the eternal battle between good and evil, salvation and damnation. Churches and palaces were overwhelming and grand, filled with golden decorations and massive paintings of saints looking down upon worshippers. It was a time when people feared the unknown and turned to faith for answers. But by the 18th century, the focus had shifted. Instead of fearing fate, people now believed in human potential, reason, and progress. Symbols no longer carried warnings of death, they became representations of knowledge and enlightenment. Instead of a skull reminding you of your mortality, an open book or a quill reminded you of the power of education and free thought. Instead of a single candle burning out to represent the passage of time, Enlightenment thinkers used light as a symbol of wisdom, illuminating the darkness of ignorance. Even architecture reflected this change. In the 17th century, buildings were meant to awe and overwhelm, reminding people of divine authority and religious devotion. But in the 18th century, structures became rational, balanced, and inspired by ancient Greece and Rome, a reflection of the Enlightenment's belief in democracy, reason, and order. Governments, universities, and libraries were designed to represent knowledge, not submission. The biggest difference between these two centuries was their outlook on the world. The 17th century was about accepting fate, while the 18th century was about challenging it. The Baroque era asked people to submit to divine will, while the Enlightenment told them to question, think, and push for progress. So, which era speaks to you more? Do you connect with the intensity, mystery, and emotion of the 17th century? Or do you admire the logic, clarity, and progress of the 18th century? Let's discuss it in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more deep dives into history and symbolism.